Celebrated Bharatnatyam and Kuchipudi dancer, activist, and occasional actor Malika Sarabhai has just released her memoir, In Free Fall My Experiments with Living. The book offers a compelling glimpse into the lives of one of India's most consequential families, the Sarabhais of Ahmedabad, and with that as the backdrop, the life of Malika Sarabhai. Growing up under the remarkably high achieving parents, the pioneering space scientist and institution builder Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, and the iconic and innovative dance shoes Mrinalini Sarabhai, Malika was surrounded by an eclectic mix of cultural, artistic, academic, and Gandhian influences, all of which she has imbibed. To get a flavor of what that part bohemian but fully urban liberal artistic life has been, Mayank Shah Report spoke to Dr. Sarabhai, who holds a PhD in organizational behavior. Malika Sarabhai. ये क्या रंग जीवन में. Do you remember that song?
Yes, I do.
I guarantee no one would have started an interview with you with that song ever, right? It was a nice song.
It was indeed.
We'll come to that 1973, your debut film, Sonal, but I want to start with your book because that's the purpose why we are here. I spent 4 months of nothingness sitting in this chair with my legs propped up on the windowsill, looking at the river and asking, why? Why did Papa die? Why did this man let me down? And then, in a eureka moment, I woke up one morning with a single thought. All I want to do is dance. Describe that eureka moment and what do you think caused it?
What do I think caused it? I think the fact that I was in a sort of empty space where it took a long time, but I could let my subconscious mind come to the fore. And it was like, oh my God, what an ass I am. Why did I not know this? Why have I spent the whole of my life till just now saying all I don't want to do is dance? And my first thought was, what a gift this will be for Amma, because in losing Papa a few years earlier, she had lost a partner. She had lost somebody that from the beginning was her greatest supporter. So much so that when Papa realized that Amma would need a lighting designer, he flew to London and took a crash course in lighting and brought back 3 lights in 1949, which we have at the entrance of Darpana, which are in working condition even today. So my first thought was, Amma now has a partner. And that was exactly what it was. It was a second innings for her. She suddenly threw herself into creating for the two of us, and she would giggle like a child and hold my hand and quickly take off her chappals and walk onto the dance floor, and she'd start saying, you know what we want to do? I want to do this with you, and I want to do this with you, and we are going to do this, and what fun, Malika. And it was super.
What was the initial training? Your father, Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, died in
end of 71.
71, and you're talking, you were 18, 19 at that point.
I was 17 and a half.
17 and a half to be precise. And it obviously your life immediately went into a flux. In that atmosphere, tell me a bit about how you came to dance.
I had always trained in dance since I was 3 years old. And I had, primarily because all my friends went to Amma's dance class. So 3 hours in a week, there was nobody to play with because they were all in the class. So I figured that it was better to be in the same class and then have fun there. So I had done my Arangetram at the age of 14. Amma had created a beautiful Arangetram for me. You know, the first mention of an Arangetram is in a 2nd century BC play, a novel, a book called Shilappadikaram, which is considered one of the gems of Sangam literature. And in it, the hero falls in love with this young courtesan who is having her arangetram in the middle of the city, in the town center. And that is the first mention of an arangetram in literature. So Amma recreated Shilapatikaram as a play and had me play Madhavi, the young courtesan who does her arangetram within the context of the play. So it was very special. I loved dancing. I loved being on stage. It was just that I didn't think I had it in me physically to put in the kind of hours that I always saw my mother put in. And seeing Amma, I knew very clearly that for every 1,000 hours of rehearsing, you get one show. And if you don't enjoy the rehearsing even more than the performance, you're going to always take a shortcut, and that's going to be a disaster.
You mentioned about whether you were not very sure whether you would be physically able to do the kind of work that was
If
needed.
I was not physically able, if I was not too lazy,
I
I was
see.
physically a very lazy child. I
Okay.
preferred curling up with a book or sitting playing with my Siamese cats rather than go out and do sports. That came later.
Right.
I sort of took to badminton later when I wanted to get fit and the whole fitness thing started. But as a child, I mean, I had to be dragged to the physical side of things.
Right.
And I thought I was too lazy to practice for hours like that.
That's a perfect segue for me to mention the fact that you began doing yoga nearly 50 years ago in 1974, but returned to it vigorously as you started pursuing your classical dance. You write that the sculpturesque poses that form the backbone of Kuchipudi demand a very flexible body and spine. How has the suppleness that yoga provided you shaped you as a dancer?
It just makes life much more easy. That I don't have to worry about creaky knees when I sit in the basic Bharatanatyam pose, that I don't have to worry about the very sculptures, Kuchipudi poses, the Tribhangas, and so on. I don't have to worry about that. That's the greatest gift, that I can rely on my body. And that is because every single day I do yoga. I may not dance, but I do yoga. And if I'm in a hotel room and I'm stuck without proper space, I will still do my Surya Namaskars and I will still do my breathing exercises. And then I'm fine.
I say. How has the transition been from yoga that limber up your muscles and spine to yoga that created overall sense of well-being?
I think one goes with the other. As one deepens in one's practice, one learns, for instance, in Shavasana to let oneself drift. It's like a state of deep meditation or hypnosis. And I think just scientifically, doing yoga or dancing releases so many oxytocins in your body that you get a soporific feeling, which then lasts you the whole day, basically through the stress and strains of running institutions and the kind of world we live in and the kind of horrific news that one reads at every instant. I've just had the news that there has been an earthquake in Nepal, and my daughter happens to be there. So the last 10 minutes I've been trying to get through to her to see that she's safe. But the world is a place where you get like 20 disastrous pieces of news every day. And I think the oxytocin push in the morning keeps one on an even keel and keeps one able to not get stressed out and not have to take a Valium.
It seems to me that dance, I mean, it's clear that is your default temperament, personality, whatever you call it. How does that influence your physical and mental conduct with people? I'm even interested in your body language when you interact with someone one on one. I've seen you many times. It's there is no slouching involved, for instance. Uh,
No,
uh,
no. I've said in my book that this walking very erect started when my mother said to me, "Do you want to be a dancer or a duck?" So, and I went to a school where we sat on the floor, and the teachers used to come and haul us up. It was a Montessori school started by my aunt Lena, called Shreyas.
sure.
And there also we were made to sit straight. So I think, I mean, obviously I carry it in my posture because I can walk into a restaurant anywhere in the world and somebody will come and say, "Are you a dancer?" So it's that training plus childhood training that shows, I suppose.
I have personally seen that when you visited Silicon Valley a long time ago when I used to be there,
Yeah.
and you had a concert. I think was it San Jose or Santa Clara, one of those places. And I remember when if memory serves, you were wearing something in black for your performance. And when you entered the hall, about a dozen or so people who had not settled down in their seats, I think they were struck by the way you walked in. It's something that I've noticed for a long time now. Is this typical of all dancers, or it's typical of those who really take it very seriously?
I can't comment on that, but in one of Peter Brook's most famous books, it's called The Empty Space. He writes that an actor walks across an empty room and has to create.
Right.
And I think somewhere I must have imbibed that, and the fact that, when my mother walked into a room, it was like a graceful beacon coming in, not showy at all, but just in what she carried, you could see a luminosity and a grace that I have never seen in anybody else. And this was true when she was 97.
Right.
And she would just raise her hand, Mayank, and you could see all the dancing that she wasn't doing. It was quite extraordinary, and I think I must have learned that and seen that, and unconsciously, even before I consciously started walking correctly, putting one foot in front of another rather than shuffling like a duck. I think I must have just loved it so much that my body just emulated it.
Right. Does that, I mean, it's perhaps an odd question to ask. Does that influence the way people get into personal friendships or relationship with you? Because people are not conscious of their body language, their demeanor, their posture, and things like that. But when they relate with you, it's very distinct. Does that influence any of your relationships?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But I do know that when people talk to me, they sort of gradually pull themselves up to not
Interesting.
slouch and not avoid eye contact, because I look very deeply into people's eyes, even from the stage. And I was, as a matter of fact, yesterday I was illustrating something to my dance students, and I said, you can't create rasa unless you want to show your soul to the audience.
Yeah.
And the soul gets reflected in the eyes, and unless you make eye contact and every person in the auditorium thinks that you are speaking to them directly, I think the magic doesn't get created.
Right. You write in your book that your personal repertoire goes from dances of the Gonds, the Nagas, the Bihu, Sambalpuri, Purulia Shau, and even flamenco, which I think you trained for the Mahabharat. That is
I,
quite
I,
a
I had the opportunity of training for it because I was in New York for 3 months. I was the only person in the entire group in the Mahabharata who was not allowed to dance. I was the only dancer.
I
Everybody else danced in different scenes, but Peter was hell bent on not letting me dance.
I see. That's quite a diverse collection of dance forms to sort of imbibe from. Now, when you do your classical dance, do you worry or not whether any of these might creep in a little bit?
No, because Amma didn't let me learn a single style besides Bharatanatyam till I had done it for 15 years. It was only after it was in every cell of mine that I was even allowed to do Kuchipudi. Now, it's funny because a lot of bad Bharatanatyam is like Kuchipudi.
Right.
For instance, this is how you hold the basic hand in Bharatanatyam. This is how you hold it in Kuchipudi. So if a dancer is tired and does this, it becomes a Kuchipudi hand.
Right.
Or this is how you hold the Dola Hasta in Bharatanatyam, very straight elbow. And this is how you hold it in Kuchipudi. If you get tired, that's how what happens. And because Bharatanatyam is Dvibhanga and Kuchipudi is Tribhanga, the basic stance and postures have to be very different, but you can mix them up. I know a lot of Bharatanatyam dancers who stick one hip out, which is
Right.
Kuchipudi, it's not Bharatanatyam. Learning folk dances, I think, opens one up because they are so much more robust and so much less into a structured alphabet.
Right.
And a lot of my very uptight students, I force them into learning folk dancing, especially the more robust things like the gond,
Right.
just to loosen them up.
Right. You know, the way you describe Bharatanatyam versus Kuchipudi, uh, it, it it almost seemed to me as if while Bharatanatyam is a little more structured and maybe even more disciplined, Kuchipudi is like a sort of an impressionist painter who just has these loose strokes.
Do you
Am
know
I
why?
right? Yeah.
Do you know why Kuchipudi got born?
No, tell me.
Okay, 15th, 16th century, the Maharajas are ruling what was then Tanjore and Andhra, what was not divided up into the states, the Pallava rulers and the Sarabojis and so on.
Right.
And the Maharajas called the dance teachers and said, you know, Bharatanatyam is very beautiful, but it can only be understood by the educated.
Oh, I see.
But the moral tales of good and bad and what is right and what is wrong actually need to be taught to the uneducated. So take Bharatanatyam and repackage it so that it becomes very appealing. So Kuchipudi was born to be appealing to the masses. It was perhaps the first packaging marketing job that
I see.
package it differently, make it sexy and saucy, make it double rhythm and double very fast so that people get attracted to it, but the stories are the same. So you are still imparting, but
Right.
it's not all bhakti bhava. It's very playful.
Right.
And therefore, even today, appeals to lay audiences more than Bharatanatyam does.
Yeah. What is your, I mean, you are trained in Bharatanatyam, but what's your personal preference left to you? Would you rather uh, do Kuchipudi or Bharatanatyam in
Uh, I,
order to relate to the
I,
audiences?
I have done so much with Bharatanatyam and taking Bharatanatyam into contemporary work and using voice work and using visual work and so on that today my Bharatanatyam is also very communicating. But as
Right.
I was growing up for the first 30 years of my career, I think, uh, there was a playful side of me that got very happy with Kuchipudi, and there was a deeper spiritual side that grew as I grew older that became Bharatanatyam, that sort of
Right.
related to Bharatanatyam. As I have progressed both in age and my career, I fall more and more deeply in love with Bharatanatyam.
I see. You know, in Indian classical singing, which is remarkably open to individual interpretation and style, and in the process, a lot of these great singers end up creating what might be their own distinct genre or school. Does that happen? I think it has perhaps happened with both you and your mother and some other dancers. Is that an accurate view of mine?
Well, Amma did much more than that. You know, Bharatanatyam is a dance of Shringara, which talks of love and devotion and the Atma and the Paramatma joining together and union, the ultimate union that some call Nirvana and some call consciousness or whatever. And Amma always felt that she wanted to use this very, very communicating language to talk about things that bothered her, to talk about things that she saw around her. And so she took the alphabet of Bharatanatyam and the alphabet of Kathakali and started talking of things that were very contemporary, starting with 1949. So what was contemporary then? In 1963, when she was learning Gujarati from a teacher who was teaching her through newspaper, she started reading about young girls in Saurashtra jumping into the well to kill themselves. And she spoke to her literate friends, Jayanti Dalal and Umashankar Joshi and Niranjan Bhagat and people, trying to understand what this was. And she was told about the dowry system and how these young girls were escaping from a terrible dowry situation where they did not and could not go back to their parents to ask for more dowry, but were being tormented. And she used Bharatanatyam without the lyrics, using the bowl, the shullas, takadinatam, which are actually abstract and reflect the sound of the percussion.
Right.
But because she wanted language not to be a barrier, she used them and put emotion into them. So, for instance, the story was of a young bride coming into a village and the village women gossiping about her and saying, so, even without a visual,
Right.
it sounds like gossip.
It does, yeah.
And that was like a major breakthrough in Indian dance. And I was brought up thinking all dancers did these kind of breakthroughs. To be very rudely shocked when I came into the field that my mother was absolutely radical and way early for her time. I mean,
Right.
to start experimenting like this in the 50s was incredible.
Right.
She created a piece on the Rigved where there was no music at all.
I see.
Things like that. It was just the sound of the feet and movement. So I was brought up with this. Today, there are more Western trained dancers who are bringing in diversity, but there are also now with Instagram and with material so easily available on your phone, more and more Indian dancers are using concepts of Western choreography and doing some very exciting things,
Right.
group choreography and so on. It didn't exist. Rukmini Devi was the first one who started working with groups. Otherwise, Bharatanatyam was a solo dance and was done in the sanctum sanctorum. It was done facing the deity so that the audience only ever saw them from the side or the back. And it was Rukmini Devi who turned this around and Amma who took it forward. Amma expanded it. Said the sanctum sanctorum is very small, the stage is very large, so make your movements larger, go further away as you go. So, these were also spatial differences that came into the dance.
Right.
But it's still relatively a very small number who are doing this. It's very difficult to make a name for yourself today. It's very difficult. I mean, you can become an instant sensation doing the boogie woogie or whatever on Insta. I'm not talking of that. I'm talking of serious classical dancing. Because there's a lot of competition. B, because there's no money for the arts. So the young artist usually ends up paying an organizer to show his or her art. And that was not the case when we were there. There were big festivals, and if you were spotted as being talented, you got invited.
Right.
It's become very, very much more commercial and with less money coming into it. So if that is the case, then it's to experiment and to push the boundaries till you have made a name for yourself becomes difficult because people are not going to invite you anyway.
Right. Let me shift gears a bit because I want to come to the book, which is the main focus of my conversation with you. You grew up in the India of the mid 1950s and early 60s in a household full of very high achievers who are also all committed Gandhian in many ways. What are your memories of that India, especially with the towering presence of your father, Dr. Vikram Sarabhai?
He wasn't a towering presence for us. He was just Papa. And Amma was just Amma. In any case, Amma was much more the towering presence because she was out there on stage and she was being feted around the world. And Papa was a scientist, but Papa was Papa. What was fun and what was, I think, life-defining was that as children, Kartikeya and I were always encouraged to interact with guests. And the guests ranged from Sir C.P. Snow to Yuri Gagarin to the Bolshoi ballet dancers, to Merce Cunningham, to Robert Rauschenberg, to John Cage, to, to Badshah Khan, to, an entire gamut of people. And we were actively encouraged to talk to them. So there was none of this, you don't know what you're asking, so just shut up, which is so common even today.
Right.
Children are not meant to be heard, they're meant to be seen. And darling, come and do your little nursery rhyme here. There was none of that. And I think that is what had the greatest impact. The other thing was that whatever my parents' achievements, Kartikeya and I knew that we came first. I remember at the age of 5, we had joined Papa at MIT. He was teaching at MIT and Harvard. And there was I think a CBS interview where Papa and Amma were being interviewed together. And Kartikeya and I were sitting with the producer in the glass cabin. And the interviewer said to them, both of you have achieved so much. What is your proudest achievement? And without blinking an eyelid, both said in unanimity, our children.
I see.
And I think that was a confidence given and a trust given. And I think, when parents try and police their children and say, who are you talking to? What are you doing? Who are you seeing? I think if in the first 5 or 7 years you have not been able to give your children the principles that you believe in, whatever they might be, then policing them is no good, because you have to trust your children. You have to trust that your grounding has been so honest and so insidiously present that the children have got it in their DNA and will not do anything to cheat or to hide. That they don't need to hide. You have to give them that trust that you might disapprove, but you don't hide. For instance, when I was smoking in front of Amma. There was none of this nonsense that I respect you and therefore I will hide you, and the mother knows that you are hiding it, and the child knows that the mother knows you are hiding it. I knew Amma disapproved, the whole family disapproved, but they didn't want me to lie about it or cheat about it or hide about it. I mean, Amma would always wrinkle up her nose when I smoked. But, and I knew she disapproved. And I said, yeah, I know you disapprove, but I am smoking.
The way you described your childhood, it sounds very rarefied to someone who might be a member of the Hoi Polloi, as it were. Did that create any sort of disconnection for you and Kartikeya Bhai in terms of interacting with people who didn't have that kind of access? If it did not, how did you manage not to do it?
First of all, my parents kept an open house. So all our friends were in the house all the time, and often part of these visits of dinners and thing. And it's just that we didn't think we were special.
Yeah, I mean, it could well be, but who at 5 goes to MIT or Harvard, where the parents or father is teaching, and then goes to the CBS studio? I mean, you may want to play it down, but beyond this modesty, it doesn't happen to 9 out of 10.
That is true, but the Sarabhais were also always considered a bit odd.
Okay. That's true. You were the bohemian type.
Yes, it was very much the bohemian type.
Yeah, I've seen that. So, when did you become aware of Vikram Bhai's seminal work, both in applied science as well as perhaps India's greatest institution builder?
I think only after I lost him.
I see.
Till then, he was just Papa who was getting busier and busier, and Papa who was getting more and more stressed by what was going on, and Papa who was doing a lot of running around, and Papa that we saw very little of.
I see. So you had no inkling of the kind of profound work scientifically that he was involved in?
Not really.
Did he?
And I was in my own world. I mean, I was growing up in the mid-60s, late 60s. The hippie movement was on. We were listening to the Beatles all the time. We were going on long cycling trips. I was in my own zone. I mean, I was enjoying being a teenager. I was getting infatuated with new boys every other day. The palpitations were first starting. The breathing was first starting. I was in my world.
What kind of boys were there? I'm curious.
Oh God!
What's your type? And that too in the Ahmedabad of the 1960s. Please tell me your type.
Oh, I didn't have a type. I think my mother used to tease me and say that I was in love with love.
Okay.
So the objects could be anything.
I see. You were barely 18 when he passed away, like we said.
I was less than 18. Yeah.
Yeah. That's generally a very impressionable age.
I was devastated. I was completely devastated.
Okay.
And felt that Papa would have wanted me to be strong, to look after Amma, and therefore I was strong. And you know that I took my IIM entrance exam 12 hours after I cremated Papa. And had it not been for older friends who were at the IIM who dragged me to the exam. Amma was in no position to send me. And all my dreams with the IIM and what I would do with my degree and were all connected to Papa. So there was no way that I would have gone to that exam had I not been dragged. And
That prompts me to digress a little bit. What was your PhD in?
uh, organizational behavior, but I came from a school where there was no issue of caste, of religion, of gender. I was the only girl on the football team. All the boys did sewing and dancing. And it was not till I was 14 and went into St. Xavier's College that I realized that people actually cared about where you came from, what your class was, tame keva, what your caste was, what your religion was, and that people would seek out people in power who could swing their first class.
Right.
And this horrified me. And this question came into my mind at the age of 14. Why do people take shortcuts and be corrupt? And I kept trying to find this out and find this out and find this out. And then when I was in the IIM at the end of my first year, David McClellan from the Harvard Business School, who is the father of this whole need theory, need to achieve, need for power, and so on, came to spend a sabbatical at IIM. And I heard his lecture on what he was developing just then, which was the need for power. And suddenly what he was saying made me realize that this could be the answer to my question, why do people become corrupt? So my PhD was with David McClelland,
I see.
in trying to understand why corruption is so rampant. I'm talking 1974, so you can imagine how many zillion times more that would be relevant today.
Right.
So my PhD was in really trying to find out why people become corrupt and why do people who don't become corrupt not become corrupt. Is it because of background? Is it because of the school? Is it because of the kind of families they come from? Is it because of the socio-economic status they are in? So that's what my PhD was about. I got my answer.
It strikes me, and it's always struck me that you could have easily gone into the world of academia, teaching at very high levels. Why is it that you didn't do it? I understand your preoccupation with dance, but couldn't you have done some of it simultaneously?
I am finally teaching at Ahmedabad University now. I teach a course called Janavak, the Voice of the People, to try and counter the McDonaldization of India that is going on. I take my class on a virtual journey of the Aos of Nagaland, the Gonds of Madhya Pradesh, through dance, through literature, through music, through weaving, through all their things. So I've become an academic, but I have to say that I like teaching people, but I don't like teaching.
I see. Well,
So I've never taught at Darpana. I only work with senior dancers or senior students who need something. I don't think I have the patience to teach on a daily basis.
right. Once again, to shift a bit, liberal pluralism with dollops of Gandhian values, were the values in your household when you were growing up. We are now at a stage where those are scoffed at, dismissed, derided. Especially you live in Ahmedabad, which has over the decades become rather hostile. Although Ahmedabad has great liberal plural traditions even now.
In the past,
I see there are still pockets where people are able to reconcile. But my
yes,
point is, how do you navigate living in Ahmedabad, the kind of atmosphere you encounter now?
When I took up the case of the Muslims after the genocide in 2002, I was ostracized in Ahmedabad by people who had seen me growing up, by people who knew what I stood for, people who knew my family. The press went to town calling me the whore of the Muslims, saying that my father would be turning in his grave because of the positions I was taking, calling me anti-Gujarat, anti-India, anti-Hindu, and all of that. So a lot of the ostracism started then. Then a series of cases were filed against me by a series of They were not called bhaktas then, but they are today. Uh, and I spent 2 years going to the police station, having my passport taken away, becoming a pariah. So a lot of the chaff of social life fell away then. And I was very happy about it. I am not a very sociable person in the sense that I would rather sit with 5 friends and talk sense or watch a movie or discuss a book or discuss politics or discuss where India was going or the world was going or what is happening with the state of the environment or something like that, then go to parties where everybody says, hello, how are you? I really don't have time for that. I had to do it because I was in a public career. A lot of that has fallen away. So my friends tell me I don't live in Ahmedabad, I live in Darpana because we have a theater here. I call the world here. I watch performances. I talk to artists. Yesterday, Devdutt Patnaik was here to give a lecture in our series called Detox. And I spent the evening with him. Geetanjali Shri, who has just won the Booker, is coming. P. Sainath is coming. So in some senses, I make the world that I want, and it's in the campus of Darpana. And if there are like-minded people who want to come and participate and watch and indulge and things like that, so be it. But otherwise, I don't really live in Ahmedabad. I don't go out to parties. I don't. When I'm on tour, I have to do it. I mean, if I'm at the Tata Lit Fest next week, then I'm going to have to go to the party that is being thrown for the writers.
Right.
But it's not. I mean, it's not what I prefer doing. I prefer, if I'm alone, I prefer watching something that I'm interested in watching or reading.
Right. It's ironic that the Hindu right castigates you even while the fact remains that you practice, which is one of the most compelling manifestations of Hindu ethos
Yeah,
and culture.
exactly.
How do you explain this dichotomy? Is it pure ignorance on the part of the multitude, or they are just deliberately
Pure,
out to?
pure ignorance, directions from the top to castigate me. Um, and a complete lack of understanding of what Hinduism is, the entire the entire structure of Hinduism having always come out of debate, always having the possibility of debate. Nothing was a commandment. And by trying to make Hinduism into Hindutva, they are actually making it into an Abrahamic religion where thou shalt not. There is no thou shalt not in Hinduism. We scold our gods. We go to bed with our gods. We take our gods into our laps and cradle them. We yell at them. That is Hinduism. Yesterday, Devdutt was making this distinction between samvad and vivad. And he said samvad is a conversation, vivad is a debate. And today, everything has turned into this debating club. And samvad is what gave rise to the Vedas, gave rise to Vedanta, gave rise to the Bhagavad Gita, gave rise to all the spiritual books. And yet is absolutely not allowed. You are shot down.
Right. But the Hindu right argues that for far too long the left liberal class has lorded over, as it were, India's national thinking, and their rise, that is the rise of the Hindu right, is a sort of a historical corrective. What do you think?
I think vis-a-vis language and thought, that might be true, that those of us who were educated in English and had the access to the world of books had an advantage and were in policy-making positions. But getting the uneducated and the criminals to decide for the country, I don't think is the alternative.
Right. Okay. Just last 3 or 4 things. What's your overall sense now about the direction that India is headed in? Is there any redeeming feature that you see that might have emerged over the last nearly 7, 8 years, either because of or despite what has happened?
the redeeming features, and I have to say that I cling to them, is in, for instance, in the corporate world, many more young people are asking the corporates before they accept a job what their policies on the environment are, what they believe should be the rights of back-end workers sitting in another country or sitting in a poorer country, what their corporate responsibility is. Are they following the triple Ps or not, on the one hand? On the second hand, I see a lot of young people questioning the meaning of the life that is laid out, a life of capitalism, a life where you are only worthy of respect if you have an Audi or a Mercedes, or depending on what you wear. I see more and more young people, and I interact with them, and I see young people taking the decision to go back to their roots to try and make a small change there. So going back to the panchayat, for instance, and saying,
Right.
we will go back trained to our village level and see if we can make that difference.
Right.
You know, having been in the political arena in the 2009 elections, I know just what a old boys club it is. When an independent like me stands up and is getting a lot of attention because I'm actually meeting people and keeping notes about the woes of every single person I meet, then the two big parties instantly join together to squash me.
Right.
And in a situation like that, where political financing is becoming more and more obtuse and more non-transparent, I think we need to start at the grassroots level, at the panchayat level. If we get into the local bodies, can we make a difference? And I see a tiny bit of hope in that. I mean, somebody like our young man from Vadgam is trying to bring that change. And I have a friend in Assam who was put into jail by the government for standing up against the CAA NRC, and he fought from jail and he won. And he is an activist and an RTI activist who is really bringing about change by empowering people. And I think it's going to be a long time before it comes to a stage when it will make a national difference. But I do see, even in Gujarat, people at the ground suffering. You hear every day about entire families committing suicide. Now, if Gujarat or India was so wonderful, why are people clamoring to get out and go to Australia or New Zealand or Spain or wherever? If we were in such a great shape as the advertisements tell us, why would entire families be committing suicide?
Right.
You know, so
Sorry, go ahead.
I do see a dissatisfaction. Whether that dissatisfaction gets translated at the time of the election is a question mark. I don't even believe that the EVMs are not rigged, because I have seen so many scientists show how EVMs are rigged. And EVM rigging doesn't have to be. I'll tell you a simple thing about that happened in my election. You know, we are supposed to have a secret ballot. What is the secret ballot? There's a table and there's a little cardboard division here. Now, Congress and BJP were 1 and 2 on the electoral machine. I was number 50. If I'm standing and if the covering of the cardboard is only till here, then you can see from my elbow whether I'm going there or here. And there are gundas from each of the parties standing there like this, looking at you. And you know that they have the power to raise your Jogi Juppi tomorrow or to pick up your daughter and rape her. Where is the free will in voting? So you don't have to rig an EVM in the actual sense of the word, though I think that is also happening. You know, we were supposed to have a paper ballot as well as the EVM for the last couple of elections. It's never happened. So, you know, on that front, I don't know how much hope one can have.
Yeah, but these are the shortcomings of a democracy, it happens in this country. I mean, they have gone to the absurd level of looking at every Chad in a paper ballot. You remember the
I
Al
know,
Gore, okay,
of
and
course I do.
it goes on even now. But my point is, let me let me turn it around a bit and say, is there anything that you think credit worthy or meriting of applause that you see on the Hindu right?
No. Yesterday, I
Okay.
was having a discussion with my grand niece, and she said, yes, but they have done some good things. I said to her, if you were being gang raped and the rapists also were nice to their dogs, what would matter more?
Well, yeah. And to end
I
on
mean,
some,
to say an old cliche, Hitler was a vegetarian.
yeah, sure.
So,
To end on a somewhat cheery note, I was thinking about your first movie, Sonal, in 1973. At a time when you were perhaps shooting for it, your sights were also trained on the IIM and the kind of background that you came from. Describe to me this how you managed to reconcile the life that you had at home and something like Sonal or even Himalaya Se Uncha in 1975 with
no, the
Sunil
two
Dutt.
were very different. Sonal was, I was found in 1971 in a boutique by a Bengali director who happened to have been in Shantiniketan with Amma.
Right.
I mean, he didn't know who I was. And then when he found out that I was Amma's daughter, then it became easier. He gave me a script about a young girl married who finds out that her husband is having an incestual relationship with his sister. Now, this was 5 years ahead of the new wave. I was intrigued by a script like that and I decided to do it. This was when I was still in Xavier's. I hadn't gone anywhere near IIM.
Okay.
And then that film didn't get released because it was pre New Wave. Then I did a second film called Muthi Bhar Chawal, which was about a young girl in a Bandra slum whose father loses his job. And the only way the family can survive is by her prostituting herself. And she prostitutes herself, saying that the day my brother or my father get a job, I'm going to lie down in front of the local train and kill myself. Now, these are not the kind of films that people were doing in 1971, 72, 73, 74, 75.
Right.
It was after I had done 3 of these films that won me awards but didn't get released that I said, damn this film industry. This is supposed to be an audience-related thing. It's not like a painter saying, it doesn't matter if my painting never gets seen.
Right.
And that is when Satyadev Dubey, the theatre director who was my friend, philosopher, guide in the film industry, said, I must do a commercial film before I quit. That was Himalaya Se Uncha, and it was a complete disaster. I hated every moment of it.
I
So, and in Himalaya Se Uncha, because I wasn't being the garam ladki that they thought I might be, we were up in Sonmarg and the crew left me behind wearing a silk shirt and ghagra in minus 12 degrees temperature and came to find me 3 hours later, and I developed a rheumatic heart.
Oh, I see. That's terrible.
And this was when I was in IIM. When I signed the movie, I said very clearly that I can only do it in my holidays. I can't miss a single day of the IIM. Then I developed a rheumatic heart. So the doctor said, you can't go up to the mountains. Then they started making all kinds of stories about me, saying that she's stuck up and she's this and she's that. So I got a really bad name about that. Then we finished the film. Sunil Dutt was my co-star. And the distributor said that Dutt, she looks like your granddaughter. And Dutt said, cut her out of the film. So the film made no sense.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, I saw the visuals. Even I thought that, and you probably were at that age. Given your looks and swag, you could have been exactly like what Zinat Aman became, or even to some extent Parveen Babi became. Did you, in that context, ever come in contact with someone like Dev Anand, who might have just picked you up?
I didn't want to be picked up. I did not want to be picked up. I had no intention of giving up my education to go. I was doing it for fun.
Yeah,
And
but even for fun, you could have
Babi was a
interacted.
classmate of mine.
I know. In fact, let me tell you this: when I was growing up, I'm a bit younger than you. yours and Parvin Babi's sort of stories were quite well known from Xavier's. That
Sure,
here are
sure.
these two completely bindass girls who couldn't give a rat's ass, or
Correct.
to be perfectly French, who couldn't give a fuck about anything.
Correct.
And tell me a bit about that. I'm curious about that. How did you two manage that?
It was not only the two of us. There was a group of us who were five. The third one became Miss India,
Right.
Kavita Bhambani.
Oh, yeah, sure, sure.
And we were just a group of bindas girls who broke into an all-male canteen, took our places there and said dal vada. And then nobody dared to sit on that table, but we were all very beautiful and very swanky and very stylish.
Right,
And the
right.
boys from all the colleges around. I mean, I met somebody the other day who said, you don't remember, but we used to come and watch you play badminton because your legs were so good.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned it, because the story, my sister went to St. Xavier. She is Pallavi. And,
Okay.
and she, not that she mentioned, but the fact that you wore miniskirts in those days. And you were, I mean, clearly you were lusted after all these testosterone
Absolutely.
driven boys. I'm curious to again find out how that was.
It was heady.
Okay.
That's all. It was heady.
And when did that change?
It hasn't.
Well, I'm glad you are saying it, because I was about to say it.